I've always thought of myself as a guy who's got his life together, but lately I'm starting to question everything. Let me set the scene for you. This all started at my dad's 62nd birthday party, and I swear it felt like my life flipped upside down in an instant. My name is Thomas. I've been working in my dad's company for the past 12 years, 12 years of dedication, grinding, and building up the business. I thought I was set. I thought I'd inherit the company one day, as any loyal family member might expect after putting in the work. It was a pretty big party, honestly. We had friends, family, business associates, you name it. My mom and dad love a good celebration, and this one was no exception. Drinks were flowing, food was amazing, and everyone seemed to be having a good time. Then came the moment my dad stood up to make a toast. It was the usual, a couple of jokes, a heartfelt thank you, and a little bit about how much he was looking forward to retiring. But then he hit us with that announcement. I'm happy to say that after much thought and discussion, I'm ready to retire in a few months, and I've decided to pass the torch of CEO to someone who I think will take the company to new heights, my grandson, Mike. I froze. I thought maybe I'd misheard him. Grandson Mike, the kid's 22, fresh out of business school, no real experience, and yet somehow he's the one taking over the company I've dedicated over a decade of my life to. The applause and congratulations around the room felt like daggers. My heart was pounding, and my stomach felt like it was going to drop out of my body. I tried to keep my composure, but inside I was fuming. Don't get me wrong, I didn't hate Mike. He's a decent enough kid when you're just chatting with him at family get-togethers. But he's young and inexperienced. He doesn't know the first thing about running a company, and I can say that with confidence because I've been running it for years now. All Mike has is a shiny degree and my parents' misplaced confidence. I, on the other hand, had years of blood, sweat, and tears invested in this business. But apparently that didn't count for much. After the toast, everyone went back to mingling, but I couldn't even process what was happening. My wife came over to check on me, and I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because she immediately asked what was wrong. I just shook my head and told her we'd talk about it later. I needed time to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Later that night, after the guests had left and the house was quiet, I confronted my dad privately. I thought maybe he'd explain it was just a formality, or that I'd still be heavily involved, something to justify this insane decision. But nope, he doubled down. He told me he believed Mike was the right choice because he was young, full of fresh ideas, and had a degree. A freaking degree. Meanwhile, I'd been the one actually building relationships with clients, managing the team, and handling day-to-day operations for over a decade. He even had the audacity to say, you can still work with him, you know. Mentor him, show him the ropes. That was it for me. I told him right then and there that I couldn't stay. There was no way I'd work under Mike after everything I'd done for the company. It wasn't even about the money or the title at that point, it was the principle. I'd earned that position, I deserved it, and being told I wasn't even considered was like a slap in the face. The next couple of days were a blur. My parents tried to talk me out of quitting, saying I was being dramatic, that I needed to think about the family. But I couldn't see it any other way. If they didn't value my work enough to give me the role I'd been working towards, then I didn't see the point in staying. So I handed in my resignation, packed up my office, and walked away. Walking out of that office for the last time was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I'd spent so many years there, I knew every inch of that place, the good parts and the bad. It wasn't just a job to me, it was a part of my life. Leaving felt like cutting off a limb, but I knew I had to. Staying would have been even worse. My wife was incredibly supportive through all of this. She told me she respected my decision and that she was proud of me for standing up for myself. She saw how much this hurt me, but she also knew I couldn't stay in a situation where I wasn't respected. That support meant the world to me because honestly, it felt like the rest of my family was against me. My mom kept calling, begging me to reconsider. My dad even showed up at my house unannounced one day, trying to convince me to come back. But every time they asked, my answer was the same, no. The hardest part of all this was the feeling of betrayal. My dad and I used to be close, especially when we first started the company. I gave up my own career to help him build his dream, and now it felt like he was throwing me away. And for what? Some idea that Mike was the future, just because he had a degree? It didn't make sense. After I quit, I thought I'd wash my hands of the family business for good. I didn't want to think about it, hear about it, or even be reminded it existed. But life doesn't work like that, especially when the thing you're trying to forget is tied to your family. Despite my best efforts, news about the company and Mike's disastrous leadership kept finding its way to me. At first, it was little things. A friend of mine who still worked there texted me saying, "Dude, Mike just fired 3 senior employees because they didn't vibe with his vision." My first reaction? I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. Mike had no clue what he was doing. Those employees had been with us since the early days and knew the business inside out. Losing them was like cutting off an arm and expecting to run a marathon. Next, I heard he was making some bold changes to our contracts. I'm all for innovation, but Mike was messing with deals that had been in place for years, relationships I had carefully built and nurtured. Clients started walking away, frustrated and confused. And still, my parents stuck by him. "He's just adjusting," my mom told a mutual friend. "It's all part of the process." Yeah, sure, the process of tanking a company. Then came the real kicker, financial fraud. I don't know all the specifics because honestly, I don't care to dig into the details. But from what I gathered, Mike tried to inflate our numbers to impress a big client. Rookie mistake. The guy probably thought he was being clever, but all he did was wave a giant red flag that screamed, "Audit me." The fallout was immediate and brutal. The company's reputation was shredded, clients bailed en masse, and the lawsuits started piling up. Hearing about all this was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. On one hand, I felt vindicated. I'd warned my parents that Mike wasn't ready for the job, but they didn't listen. On the other hand, it was painful to see something I'd worked so hard to build crumble in such a short amount of time. I didn't want to care, but I couldn't help it. That company had been my life for 12 years. It was like watching someone take a sledgehammer to a house you built with your own 2 hands. But here's the thing, none of this surprised me. Mike was never prepared to lead. The guy grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth, never had to struggle for anything. He had this arrogance about him, like he thought he could walk into a room and just figure things out as he went. That might work in school, but not in the real world. Business isn't forgiving, it doesn't care about your last name or your GPA, and Mike was learning that the hard way. I wasn't the only one who saw it coming. I started getting calls and texts from former coworkers, people I hadn't spoken to in months. "Man, we miss you around here," one guy said. "It's a mess without you." Another told me, "The place feels like a sinking ship. I don't know how much longer I can stick around." It was flattering, sure, but also bittersweet. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, people who had trusted me and supported me. Hearing them struggle made me wish I could help, but I knew better than to get involved. I wasn't about to swoop in and clean up Mike's mess. That wasn't my job anymore. What really got me, though, was how my parents handled all of this. Instead of holding Mike accountable, they made excuses for him. "He's under a lot of pressure," my mom said when someone asked about the fraud charges. "He just needs time to find his footing." Time. The guy had managed to nearly destroy the company in less than 6 months. How much more time did he need? 6 months after I walked out of the family business, the inevitable happened. I'd been bracing myself for it, but still felt a wave of mixed emotions when I saw my parents standing on my doorstep. They looked older, more stressed than I'd ever seen them. My dad had this awkward stiffness to him, like he didn't want to be there but knew he had no choice. My mom, though, her expression said it all, desperation. I didn't invite them in right away. Honestly, I was tempted to shut the door in their faces, but I didn't. "Can we come in?" my dad asked, his voice hesitant. I stepped aside without a word, and they shuffled in. The tension in the room was immediate. My wife, who'd been in the kitchen, gave me a look but didn't say anything. She knew this moment was coming too. She quietly slipped upstairs, leaving me to deal with it. I sat down across from them, arms crossed, waiting for them to start. My mom jumped in first, she always did. "We need your help," she said, her voice wavering. "The business is. It's in trouble. Mike made some mistakes. Big ones." I didn't respond. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch. It was clear she wanted me to fill the gap, to jump in and offer a solution. I didn't. Eventually, my dad spoke up. "He's in over his head," he admitted, rubbing his temple like he had a headache. "And now the company is facing lawsuits, losing clients. We're barely hanging on." This was a moment I'd thought about many times since I quit. I'd imagined them coming to me, asking me to fix things, and me laughing in their faces. But now that it was actually happening, I felt more annoyed than anything else. It wasn't satisfying or validating, it was just sad. "And what do you expect me to do about it?" I finally asked. My tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't kind either. I wanted them to squirm a little. They deserved it. My mom reached out, putting her hand on mine. "You know the business better than anyone," she said. "We need you to come back. Please." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For years, all I wanted was for them to recognize my value, to admit I was the one keeping the company afloat. And now here they were, practically begging me to save them. But it didn't feel like a victory, it felt like an insult. After everything, they still expected me to clean up their mess. "Why don't you ask Mike?" I said, pulling my hand away. "He's the CEO, right? Let him fix it." "Mike can't handle it," my dad said, frustration creeping into his voice. "We made a mistake. We see that now. But this is bigger than him, it's about the company, about everything we've built." "Everything I've built," I corrected. "I'm the one who spent 12 years making that company what it is, and you threw me aside like I was nothing." My dad sighed heavily, leaning back in his chair. He looked tired, defeated. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he said. "We thought Mike would bring something new to the table. But you were right, he wasn't ready, and now we're paying the price." Hearing him admit that should have felt good, but it didn't. It just made me angrier. They'd known Mike wasn't ready, I'd told them over and over, but they hadn't listened. And now they wanted me to pick up the pieces. "I'm sorry," my mom said softly, tears welling up in her eyes. "We were wrong. We should have trusted you. But it's not too late, you can still fix this." I stood up, pacing the room. "You want me to fix it?" I said, my voice rising. "You think I can just walk back in there and magically make everything better? Do you even hear yourselves? You didn't trust me before, but now that you're desperate, I'm suddenly good enough." They didn't say anything, and the silence only fueled my anger. "Do you even understand what you're asking? You're asking me to put my life on hold again, to bail you out of a situation you created. And for what? So you can pat me on the back and tell me, 'Good job, kid,' before throwing me under the bus again? That's not what this is," my dad said firmly. "This is about saving the company, saving our legacy." "Your legacy," I shot back. "Not mine. Not anymore." My mom started crying then, full-on sobbing into her hands. My dad just sat there, staring at the floor like he didn't know what to do. And for a moment, I felt bad. They were my parents, after all. But then I remembered the humiliation, the betrayal, the countless nights I'd spent working late while they were off praising Mike for his good grades. "I can't help you," I said finally, my voice steady. "I won't. I've already started working on my own plans. I'm building something for myself now, and I'm not going to throw that away to clean up your mess." My dad looked up, his face hardening. So that's it? You're just going to turn your back on your family? I laughed, a bitter sound. You turned your back on me first. Don't try to guilt me into this. It won't work. They left soon after that, my mom still sniffling and my dad looking like he wanted to argue but didn't have the energy. As soon as the door closed behind them, I let out a shaky breath. My wife came downstairs, wrapping her arms around me. You did the right thing, she said. You don't owe them anything. She was right, of course. I knew that. But it still hurt. Walking away from the company had been hard enough. Walking away from my parents felt even harder. But I couldn't go back, not now, not ever. After slamming that door on my parents, metaphorically and literally, I realized it was time to focus on what lay ahead. If I wasn't going back to their company, I needed to build something of my own. Starting from scratch is daunting, even when you know what you're doing. I didn't have a big office or a fancy team, hell, I didn't even have a proper plan at first. All I had were the skills and knowledge I'd built over 12 years, and the determination to prove to myself, and maybe a little to them, that I could do this. The first step was figuring out what kind of business I wanted to create. Real estate was all I knew, so that part was a no-brainer. But I didn't just want to recreate my dad's company, I wanted to do something different, something better. I'd learned a lot over the years, not just about the market, but about how to treat people, clients, employees, everyone. My parents had always treated the business like a machine, churning out deals without much regard for the people behind them. I wanted to build something more personal, more human. I started by reaching out to a few of my old clients. These were people I'd worked with for years, people who trusted me. I explained that I was starting my own thing and asked if they'd be interested in working with me again. To my surprise and relief, most of them were enthusiastic. We were wondering when you'd get back in the game, one of them said. Mike's been a disaster. We've been waiting for someone to step up. Their responses gave me the boost of confidence I needed. If they believed in me, maybe I could pull this off after all, but getting clients on board was just one piece of the puzzle. I also needed a team, the company wasn't going to run itself. That's where my old coworkers came in. I'd kept in touch with a few of them after I left, and I knew some were unhappy with how things had been going under Mike's leadership. One by one, I started making calls. Hey, I'm putting something together, I told them. It's small right now, but I think it has potential. Are you interested? The responses were overwhelmingly positive. Many of them had already left my dad's company, tired of the chaos and mismanagement. They were between jobs, looking for something new. I'm in, one of them said immediately. I've been waiting for this call. Within a couple of weeks, I had a small but solid team. We didn't have a fancy office or shiny equipment, just a shared workspace and a lot of enthusiasm. It felt like the early days of my dad's company, when we were scrappy and hungry, except this time it was my vision, my rules. Setting up the business was a whirlwind. Between registering the company, building a website, and figuring out how to market ourselves, I barely had time to breathe, but it was exhilarating. Every small win, a client signing on, a lead turning into a deal, felt like a massive accomplishment. For the first time in years, I wasn't just working, I was creating something. And it felt incredible. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments of doubt, moments where I questioned whether I was biting off more than I could chew. The stress of juggling everything, finances, logistics, client relationships, was overwhelming at times. But every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself why I was doing this. I wasn't just building a business, I was proving to myself that I could. One of the biggest challenges was balancing work and personal life. My wife was incredibly supportive, but I knew it wasn't easy for her. She was working full-time while I poured all my energy into the business, often working late into the night. You're going to burn out if you keep this up, she warned me one night as I sat hunched over my laptop, reviewing contracts. I know, I said, rubbing my temples. But if I don't push now, it'll never take off. She didn't argue, but I could see the concern in her eyes. It was a reminder that while building the business was important, so was maintaining the life we'd built together. As the weeks went by, things started to fall into place. Our first few deals closed smoothly, and the feedback from clients was overwhelmingly positive. "This feels like the old days," one of them told me, "when things were simpler, more personal." I missed this. Hearing that felt like validation. I was doing something right. By the time I'd settled into the rhythm of my new business, things with my family had escalated. Word had spread about what I was doing, clients switching to me, employees reaching out to join my team, and it didn't take long for the news to reach my parents and sister. I hadn't spoken to any of them since their visit to my house, and I wasn't planning to. But they clearly weren't done with me. It started with emails. My dad sent a few, all variations of the same message. He wanted to talk, to work things out. I ignored them. Then my mom started calling. At first it was once a week, then every few days. I never picked up. Eventually, she left a voicemail that made my blood boil. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice trembling with barely concealed anger. "You're tearing this family apart. I don't know how you can live with yourself." I deleted the message without replying. What was there to say? They'd made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. I wasn't responsible for their mess, no matter how much they tried to pin it on me. But things really came to a head when my sister got involved. Unlike my parents, who were still trying to guilt me into coming back, she went straight for the jugular. One day, out of nowhere, I received a letter from a lawyer. At first, I thought it was a mistake, but as I read through it, my stomach sank. They were accusing me of stealing clients and employees. According to the letter, I'd intentionally undermined their business by poaching key accounts and personnel. They claimed I was violating some sort of unwritten family agreement and demanded I cease all operations immediately. If I didn't, they threatened to take legal action. I couldn't help but laugh as I read it. It was so ridiculous, so petty. There was no non-compete clause in my contract when I worked for them. I'd checked twice. They had no legal standing whatsoever. But the fact that they'd resorted to this tactic told me everything I needed to know about how desperate they were. Instead of responding directly, I forwarded the letter to my lawyer. "Handle it," I told him. "I don't have time for this nonsense." He assured me it was an empty threat and not to worry. Still, the whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth. A few days later, my parents showed up at my office unannounced. It was the first time they'd seen the new space, and I could tell they weren't happy about it. My mom looked around with thinly veiled disdain while my dad's expression was a mix of anger and defeat. "Do you really think this is going to work?" my dad asked, gesturing at the office. "You're playing a dangerous game." I leaned back in my chair, unfazed. "It's already working," I said simply. "And it's not a game." My mom's face flushed with anger. "You're ruining everything," she snapped. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family? To us?" I stood up, keeping my voice calm but firm. "What I'm doing," I said, "is building something for myself, something you didn't think I was capable of. If that bothers you, that's your problem, not mine." They didn't stay long after that. I think they realized there was no point in trying to guilt me anymore. But their visit left me shaken, not because of what they said, but because it confirmed something I'd suspected for a while. They weren't just upset about losing the business, they were upset about losing control over me. For years, I'd been the dependable one, the one they could count on to keep things running smoothly. I'd sacrificed so much of my own life to help build their dream, and now that I was gone, they didn't know what to do. It wasn't about the clients or the money, it was about the power dynamic. And they hated that I'd taken it back. Meanwhile, my business began to grow. It wasn't explosive growth by any means, but it was steady, and that was enough for me. What really surprised me was how many clients and employees from my dad's company started coming to me. It wasn't something I actively pursued, at least not at first, but word got around that I was starting my own thing, and people reached out. If you're looking for more staff, let me know, one former coworker said. I can't stand it here anymore. Another client emailed me saying, we've always trusted you. Let's talk. I wasn't poaching, they were coming to me. And honestly, it felt good. These were people who recognized my value, who wanted to work with me because of what I brought to the table. It was a stark contrast to how my family had treated me. By the end of the second month, we'd outgrown our shared workspace and started looking for a proper office. It was a small milestone, but it felt huge. Standing in that empty space, imagining the possibilities, I couldn't help but smile. This was mine, all of it. No one could take it away from me. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. My wife started working with me part-time about 8 months after I'd started the business. Having her there, building something together, made everything feel complete in a way I hadn't expected. We weren't just husband and wife anymore, we were partners in every sense of the word. You know what I love about this, she said one evening as we were reviewing the day's appointments. What's that? This is ours, she said, gesturing around the office. No one can take it away from us. No one can make decisions about our future without us having a say. She was right. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly in control of my own destiny. No family politics, no favoritism, no having to prove myself over and over again. Just hard work, smart decisions, and the satisfaction of building something from the ground up. The business continued to grow steadily. We weren't trying to become some massive corporation, we wanted to stay personal, to maintain the relationships that made the work meaningful. But we were successful enough to be comfortable, to plan for the future, to feel secure in what we'd built. About a year after I'd left my family's company, I heard that they'd finally closed their doors for good. My dad had filed for bankruptcy, and what little was left of the business was being liquidated to pay off debts. It was the end of an era, the company that had been such a huge part of my life for over a decade was gone. I thought I'd feel something more when I heard the news, sadness, maybe, or anger, or even relief. But mostly I just felt nothing. It was like hearing about something that had happened to strangers. That chapter of my life was closed, and I'd already moved on. A few weeks later, I got a text from one of my old coworkers, saw the bankruptcy filing in the paper. How are you holding up? I texted back, I'm doing great, actually. Hope you are too. And I meant it. I was doing great. Better than great, actually. I was happy. About 18 months after I'd started my own business, something happened that I hadn't expected. I was at a networking event, something I'd started doing more of as the business grew, when I spotted a familiar face across the room. It was Mike. He looked different. Older, maybe, or just worn down. Gone was the cocky confidence he'd had when my parents first announced he'd be taking over. He looked like someone who'd been through hell and was still finding his way out. For a moment, I considered just avoiding him. What would be the point of a conversation? But something made me walk over. Mike, I said, extending my hand. He looked up, surprised. Oh. Hey. I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk to me. We shook hands, and I could see he was nervous. Good, I thought. He should be. How are you doing? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Honestly? I've been better. I heard about your business, though. Sounds like it's going really well. It is, I said simply. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment before he spoke again. Look, I know this probably doesn't mean much, but I'm sorry. About everything. I was in way over my head, and I let my ego get in the way of asking for help. I should have listened to you from the beginning. I studied his face, looking for any sign that this was just another manipulation, but he seemed genuine, beaten down, humbled, but genuine. What are you doing now? I asked. Working for a small firm downtown. Entry-level stuff, but I'm learning. Actually learning this time, not just pretending I know what I'm doing. He paused. I should have started there in the first place, instead of thinking I could just jump into running a company. I nodded. Yeah, you should have. It wasn't exactly forgiveness, but it wasn't condemnation either. Mike had learned his lesson the hard way, and while I couldn't forget what his arrogance had cost, not just me, but all the employees and clients who'd suffered when the company collapsed, I could acknowledge that he seemed to have grown from the experience. For what it's worth, he said as we prepared to part ways, I always knew you should have gotten that job. I was just too proud and too stupid to say anything. I looked at him for a long moment. Thanks for saying that, I said finally. But you're right, it doesn't change anything. He nodded, understanding. I know, but I needed to say it anyway. We parted ways after that, and I never saw him again. But the encounter left me feeling something I hadn't expected, closure. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a sense that at least one person from that whole mess had learned something from it. It's been over 2 years now since I walked out of my family's company, and I can honestly say it was the best decision I ever made. My business is thriving, we've got a solid client base, a great team, and a reputation for integrity and results. My wife and I work together every day, building something that's truly ours. I still live in the same city as my parents, but we might as well be on different planets. I hear about them occasionally through mutual acquaintances, they're getting by, but just barely. My dad took a job with another real estate firm, working as a regular agent after decades of being the boss. My mom is struggling with the change in their circumstances. My sister, from what I hear, is still bitter and still blaming everyone but herself for how things turned out. Do I feel bad for them? Sometimes. They're my family, after all, and watching them struggle isn't easy. But I also remember that every single bit of their current situation is a direct result of their own choices. They chose to pass me over for someone who wasn't qualified. They chose to ignore my warnings about Mike's incompetence. They chose to make excuses for him instead of holding him accountable. And when it all fell apart, they chose to blame me instead of taking responsibility. I've built a good life for myself despite them, not because of them. And I'm proud of that. My wife and I are talking about starting a family soon. The business is stable enough now that we can plan for the future with confidence. Our kids won't grow up in a family business where favoritism and politics determine their worth. They'll know that success comes from hard work, integrity, and treating people with respect, lessons I learned the hard way but intend to pass on the right way. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently. What if my parents had recognized my contributions and given me the CEO position I'd earned? What if they'd listened when I warned them about Mike? What if they'd chosen merit over family politics? But I don't dwell on those thoughts for long. The truth is, I'm happier now than I ever was working for them. I'm building something that's mine, with someone I love, surrounded by people who respect and value what I bring to the table. I have control over my own destiny in a way I never did before. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Getting pushed out of that company forced me to bet on myself in a way I might never have done otherwise. It made me realize that I didn't need their approval or their validation to be successful. I'm not the same person who walked into that birthday party 2 years ago, expecting to be handed the keys to the family business. I'm stronger, more independent, and more confident in my own abilities. I've learned that family loyalty is worthless if it only goes one way, and that sometimes walking away is the only way to preserve your self-respect. If there's anyone out there reading this who's in a similar situation, feeling unappreciated, overlooked, or taken for granted by family or employers, my advice is this: know your worth, and don't let anyone convince you to settle for less than you deserve. It took me 12 years to learn that lesson, but I'm grateful I learned it at all. Some people never do. My parents taught me a lot over the years, but the most valuable lesson they gave me was unintentional. They showed me that the only person you can truly count on is yourself. Everyone else, family included, is capable of letting you down when their own interests are at stake. But that's okay. Because when you learn to rely on yourself, when you learn to trust your own judgment and value your own contributions, you become unstoppable. No one can take that away from you. And that's exactly where I am today, unstoppable, independent, and happier than I've ever been. Sometimes the best revenge really is just living well,